My body woke up before my mind. I felt the warmth of someone beside me even before I opened my eyes. The woody scent of a masculine cologne and the sound of calm breathing made me freeze. What? My head throbbed, and a thick fog covered my memories of the previous night. I slowly opened my eyes, my heart racing, and saw a male arm resting on my waist. I swallowed hard. The room was illuminated by the soft morning light coming through the partially open curtains. I knew this room well. It was mine. But the man beside me? He was a complete mystery. My gaze slowly traveled up the rumpled sheet until it found a face partially hidden by the pillow. He had messy brown hair, a light beard, and strong features. His broad chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. I didn't know who he was. My heart hammered against my ribs. My mind screamed for me to pull away, but my body was paralyzed. How did this happen? Who was this man? Carefully, I lifted the sheet a little. He was dressed, at least in pants. I sighed in relief, but the knot in my stomach didn't disappear. I needed to get out of there. I needed to understand what was happening. I moved slowly, trying to slide his arm away without waking him, but the moment I began to slip out of bed, he stirred. A hoarse groan escaped his lips before his eyes slowly opened. Green eyes, deep, piercing, and surprised. "Good morning?" His voice sounded dragged out, sleepy, but loaded with something I couldn't decipher. My heart almost leaped out of my mouth. Who was this man? And what was he doing in my bed? My body froze the instant those green eyes locked onto mine. He blinked slowly as if trying to organize his thoughts, and then furrowed his brow, confused. "You..." His voice was hoarse, scratched from sleep. "You look scared." Scared? That was an understatement. My heart was beating so hard that I was sure he could hear it. "Who are you?" My voice came out stronger than I expected, but my whole body was tense. "And what are you doing in my bed?" He ran a hand over his face, taking a deep breath before responding. "My name is Ethan. Ethan Carter." The name didn't ring a bell at all. He sat up slowly, the muscles in his arm contracting under his tan skin, and looked around as if he were just as lost as I was. "You don't remember anything?" he asked, tilting his head. I swallowed hard. My brain was working frantically, trying to piece together the events of the previous night, but all I could manage were disconnected flashes. The hotel bar, the golden glow of a whiskey in a crystal glass, a low and engaging laugh. I stared at him, feeling a wave of panic rise in my throat. "Did we..." My voice faltered, and I had to take a deep breath before continuing. "Did we sleep together?" The corner of his mouth lifted into a half smile. "That depends on what you mean by sleep together." My face burned. "That's not funny." He sighed and ran a hand through his messy hair. "Okay, sorry, but for your information, no, nothing happened. You were drunk and passed out before you could even take your shoes off." I looked at my feet, and indeed, I was still in my socks. A wave of relief washed over me, but the confusion remained. "Then why are you here?" Ethan looked at me for a moment before saying with a playful tone in his voice, "Because you wouldn't let me leave." My stomach flipped. I never did that kind of thing. Never. So why had I done it this time? I blinked, trying to process his words. "I didn't let you leave?" Ethan nodded, a half smile dancing on his lips. "You were quite insistent, actually. You said I was the only person you could trust that night." My throat went dry. "I'm not like that," I murmured, more to myself than to him. "I didn't bring strangers to my room. I didn't drink to the point of blacking out. That wasn't me." But then, why had it been different this time? My gaze swept the room, as if the walls could provide answers. My red dress was thrown over the armchair next to the bed, my purse was open on the floor, and my high-heeled shoes were scattered near the door. Ethan followed my gaze and seemed to guess my thoughts. "Don't worry. I brought you to the room because you couldn't even walk straight, but I slept on top of the covers." Only then did I realize he was shirtless, but still wearing dark dress pants. The sheet covering his chest slipped a little as he leaned forward, revealing a toned but not overly muscular physique. I quickly averted my gaze, feeling my cheeks burn. "Why did you stay?" I asked. still trying to understand everything. He shrugged. Because you asked me to. My stomach flipped again. Something about that answer unsettled me. But why? What did I say? He studied me for a moment before responding. You said you were running from someone. My body went cold. What? My breath hitched in my throat. Suddenly, a flash invaded my mind. Hands pulling my arm, a deep voice calling my name in the middle of the bar, my heart racing as I tried to pull away. No. Do you remember anything now? Ethan asked, watching my expression closely. I remembered. And from the way the cold crept up my spine, I knew it wasn't good. My heart raced. The air in the room felt thin, and for a moment, everything around me dissolved. The warm touch of a hand on my arm, a firm voice calling my name, the suffocating feeling of being trapped. I swallowed hard and looked at Ethan. Who was I running from? He kept his gaze fixed on mine, assessing my reaction before answering. You didn't tell me the name. You just kept repeating that you didn't want to see him, that he couldn't find you. My stomach churned. The fog in my mind began to dissipate. I remembered being in the hotel bar, ordering drink after drink, trying to drown the frustration of the night. And then, my ex. The word slipped out like a whisper. Ethan didn't seem surprised. He was there? I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to piece together the loose fragments of memory. The hotel, the bar, the soft music playing in the background. And then, his voice. Yes, he saw me. He tried to talk to me. Ethan crossed his arms, the muscles tense. Did he force you into anything? I shook my head, but the truth was I wasn't sure. I remembered my own urgency to get out of there, the irrational fear that took hold of me, my hands shaking as I tried to call a taxi. That's when Ethan showed up. My gaze found his again. You helped me get out of there. He nodded. I saw you trying to escape the bar, kind of desperate. You looked terrified. When that guy tried to follow you, you grabbed my arm and asked me to pretend to be your boyfriend. My breath hitched. And you did that? The corner of his mouth lifted into a half smile. I did. But it wasn't just any pretense. You practically kissed me in front of him. My eyes widened. I what? Ethan chuckled softly. You don't need to be so shocked. It was a quick kiss. But it was enough for him to back off. After that, you asked me to walk you to your room. You said you didn't want to be alone. I covered my face with my hands. Oh my God. Ethan was silent for a few seconds before saying, Look, I don't know what that guy did to you, but I can recognize fear when I see it. There was something in his voice, a serious and protective tone that sent a shiver down my spine. I took a deep breath and removed my hands from my face. Thank you for staying. He watched me for a moment, then gave a small smile. You're welcome. A comfortable silence settled between us. For the first time since I woke up, I felt like I could breathe. But one question was still nagging at my mind. Did you stay in bed with me all night? His smile widened a bit. I thought you had already figured that out. My face burned, and for the first time that morning, I couldn't tell if it was from embarrassment or something else. My heart was still racing, but now it was for a different reason. Ethan was looking at me with a playful half smile, as if he was enjoying my embarrassment. I, on the other hand, didn't know where to hide my face. Did you stay in bed with me all night? My voice came out quieter than I would have liked. He tilted his head a little, observing my reaction. Yes, but don't worry, I stayed on top of the covers. I'm not a complete jerk. My face heated up even more. I didn't mean that. He laughed softly. Of course you did. I rolled my eyes, trying to ignore how pleasant his laughter was. You could have left after I fell asleep. He shrugged. I could have. But you held my hand so tightly that I thought your ex might show up at any moment and barge into the room. My breath hitched. I held his hand. The pieces in my mind began to fit together. The fear I felt in the bar. The way I clung to Ethan as if he were my only salvation. And now this... My voice faltered. I'm sorry. He looked at me seriously this time. You don't need to apologize. I didn't know how to respond. Something about the way he said that made my chest tighten. So, to change the subject, I tossed the blanket aside and tried to get up, or at least I attempted to. As soon as my feet hit the floor, my head spun. I brought my hand to my forehead, feeling a slight dizziness. In an instant, Ethan was already by my side, holding my arm. Hey, take it easy. You drank quite a bit last night. I let out a long sigh. It seems so. He helped me steady myself before letting go of my arm. I'll order breakfast for you. Any preference? I looked at him, surprised. You don't have to do that. He crossed his arms as if challenging my response. After everything that happened yesterday? I do. There was something so natural in the way he said that, as if taking care of me was the most obvious thing in the world. And for some reason, that made my chest warm in a strange way. I sighed, defeated. Pancakes. He smiled, picking up the phone to call room service. While he placed the order, I watched him in silence. Ethan Carter, a complete stranger when I went to sleep. But now, a man I couldn't stop looking at. And for the first time since I woke up, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't regretting letting him stay. As Ethan spoke on the phone with room service, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to organize my thoughts. My ex had shown up at the bar, I had panicked, and somehow Ethan became my safe harbor that night. None of this made sense. I had never been the type to throw myself into a stranger's arms. But there was something about him, something that made me feel safe. He hung up the phone and turned to me, casually leaning against the dresser. Pancakes are on the way. I nodded, still somewhat lost in my thoughts. He raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking about? I took a deep breath. About you. Surprise flickered briefly across his face before it was replaced by a playful smile. Already this early? I rolled my eyes. I mean, I still don't understand why you did all this. You don't know me. You had no obligation to stay. He studied me for a moment before responding. Maybe because you really seem to need help. I crossed my arms. Many people need help. Not everyone stops what they're doing to take care of a stranger. Ethan gave a half smile. Maybe you got lucky. Luck. Was that it? Something told me there was more to that story, but before I could ask, I heard a knock at the door. Room service. Ethan went to the door and took the tray from the attendant. The smell of coffee and fresh pancakes filled the room, and my stomach rumbled softly. He laughed. It seems your body approved my decision to order breakfast. That doesn't mean I trust you, I murmured, grabbing my coffee cup. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from me, watching me with those intense green eyes. So get to know me. I paused mid-motion, holding the cup close to my lips. What? He shrugged. If you don't trust me, find out who I am. Ask questions. I blinked, unsure if he was joking or serious. But for some reason, I accepted the challenge. All right. What do you do for a living, Ethan Carter? He smiled as if he had been expecting that question. Lawyer. I choked on my coffee. What? He laughed. Why the surprise? Because I figured you were anything but a lawyer. And what did you imagine? He leaned his elbow on the table, looking genuinely curious. I bit my lip, hesitant. I don't know. A rich businessman, a mysterious artist. He laughed louder this time. Sorry to disappoint you, but my life isn't that exciting. Something told me that wasn't entirely true. And as he cut a piece of pancake, I realized that perhaps this morning had turned into something much more than just breakfast with a stranger. Maybe it was the beginning of something I wasn't ready to understand yet. Ethan's fork hovered in the air as he watched me, waiting for my next question. All right, lawyer, I murmured, taking a sip of the hot coffee. And what was a lawyer doing alone in a hotel bar? The corner of his mouth lifted into a half smile. You think only mysterious rich people go to hotel bars? I think lonely people do. I crossed my arms, staring at him. Ethan was silent for a moment, twirling the fork between his fingers. When he finally responded, his tone was more serious than before. I had a rough day at work. I wanted a drink. A bit of silence. I raised an eyebrow. And you found a desperate woman clinging to your arm instead. He laughed. It wasn't exactly how I imagined my night, but I can't say it was bad. My skin tingled with the intensity of his gaze. Ethan had this laid-back way about him, a natural charm that made him seem confident all the time. But there was something deeper there, something I still couldn't decipher. And you? He leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms. What were you doing in that bar? My stomach tightened. I already told you. Trying to avoid my ex. Right? But what happened between you two? My gaze dropped to my cup, as if the dark coffee could give me courage. It wasn't something I liked to talk about. But Ethan had stayed with me all night, had protected me without asking questions. Maybe he deserved an answer. He wasn't who I thought he was, I began, choosing my words carefully. We spent years together, but in the end, I found out it was all a lie. Lie how? I took a deep breath. He cheated on me, for a long time, and lied to me as if I were a fool. Ethan said nothing. He just watched me, his jaw slightly tense. I broke up with him, but he didn't take it well. He stalked me for months, called, showed up where I was. I thought he had given up, but then, last night happened. Ethan set his coffee cup on the table, his eyes shining with something dangerous. Did he touch you? I shook my head. No. But the way he looked at me, like I still belonged to him. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, taking a deep breath. If he bothers you again, let me know. The firmness in his voice caught me off guard. Why? He held my gaze for a moment before answering, because I don't like seeing people scared, especially you. My chest tightened. There was something about Ethan, something that made me feel safe, but at the same time completely exposed. And in that moment, I had the feeling that my life was about to change, and that Ethan Carter might be the reason for it. The silence between us felt thicker than the air in the room. Ethan continued to watch me with that intense look, as if he were processing everything I had said. I should have felt uncomfortable. I should have wanted to end this conversation, go on with my day, and forget that I woke up with a stranger in my bed. But for some reason, I didn't want him to leave. And then, as if reading my mind, he broke the silence. What are you going to do today? I furrowed my brow. What do you mean? I mean, you look like you need to get out a bit. Breathe. And I guess I'm not ready to leave yet. My mouth opened, but no answer came immediately. Ethan Carter, a complete stranger just hours ago, was now sitting across from me, inviting me to... What? Spend the day with him? Are you asking me out? I asked, skeptical. He smirked. I think so. The idea was absurd. I barely knew him. He was a lawyer drinking alone in hotel bars, and I was a woman fresh out of a tumultuous relationship. This didn't make sense. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw something that made me hesitate. Security. And if I say no, I challenged. He crossed his arms, relaxing in the chair. Then I'll respect your choice, wish you a good day, and leave. He wouldn't insist. He wouldn't play games. And that, in itself, was already different from anything I knew. I took a deep breath. I should say no. I should have ended this before it became complicated. But instead, I heard my own voice say, "Where do you want to take me?" Ethan's smile widened, as if he already knew my answer before I even spoke it. Let it be a surprise. My heart raced. And that's how, against all logic, I agreed to spend another day with a man who, somehow, was already completely messing up my life. Shortly after, Ethan and I left the hotel. The morning sun lit up the streets of New York, and the cold February breeze brought the smell of freshly brewed coffee from nearby cafes. I pulled my coat closer to my body, still unable to believe I had agreed to this. "Okay, Carter, where are we going?" I asked, trying to sound in control of the situation. He glanced at me sideways, a playful smile on his lips. "You're going to have to trust me." Trust. A complicated word for me lately. But something about Ethan made me want to believe he wasn't like the others. We walked a few blocks until we reached a small cafe with a charming red brick facade. The outdoor tables had wool blankets draped over the chairs, and the display window showcased golden croissants and fresh pies. A cafe? I raised an eyebrow. He laughed. You seem to need a calm start. We entered, and the smell of cinnamon and hot chocolate enveloped me like a hug. We chose a table in the corner, near the window. Ethan ordered a cappuccino, and I opted for tea. Do you always go out to save unknown women in hotel bars? I asked, crossing my arms. He laughed, shaking his head. Actually, no, but you didn't seem like someone who needed saving. Oh, really? I raised my eyebrow. Because I felt exactly that way last night. Ethan became serious for a moment, absently fiddling with the napkin on the table. Maybe you just needed someone to stand by your side. My chest tightened. He was right. It wasn't about being saved. It was about not being alone. I sighed, looking out at the busy street outside. And why did you stay? Ethan smiled, but this time it was a different smile, softer. Because something told me you were worth it. My eyes met his, and for a moment, New York faded away around us. I should pull back. I should thank Ethan and go my way. But the more time I spent with him, the more I realized that maybe fate had other plans. And for the first time in a long time, I was willing to find out what they were. The coffee between us cooled, but I couldn't take my eyes off Ethan. There was something about him that unsettled me. The way he looked at me, as if he were trying to decipher me but without hurry, as if he had all the time in the world to understand me. Do you always talk this way? I asked, trying to break the strange atmosphere hanging between us. He raised an eyebrow. What way? Like you've known me for years. Ethan smirked, bringing the cappuccino cup to his lips before responding, Maybe I'm just good at observing. I crossed my arms, pretending to be uninterested. And what have you observed about me, lawyer? He leaned a bit forward, resting his elbows on the table. You try to seem strong, but last night, behind the alcohol and the nervous smile, there was fear. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't scared, I lied. He wasn't convinced. No? Then why did you hold my hand all night? My cheeks flushed. I didn't do that. Ethan just smiled as if he knew a secret I didn't remember. You did. He twirled the cup between his fingers. And you know what? I didn't mind. My throat went dry. There was something dangerous happening here. An invisible tension, a silent game I was already participating in without realizing it. What are you doing, Ethan? Having coffee with you. I rolled my eyes. You know what I mean. He rested his chin on his hand, watching me with a playful glint in his eye. I'm waiting for you to decide. Decide what? He shrugged. If you're going to keep running or if you're going to let me stay. My chest tightened, because for the first time, I didn't know what answer I wanted to give. I held the cup tighter than necessary, trying to ignore the heat rising through my body with Ethan's words. Let you stay? My voice came out softer than I wanted. He smirked as if he were perfectly comfortable with my confusion. Yeah, in your day, in your story. I swallowed hard. Ethan, we've known each other for less than 24 hours. And yet, you agreed to have coffee with me. He was right, but I didn't want to admit it. The truth was that being there with him felt easy. As if I didn't have to work to keep a conversation going or to be interesting. As if somehow he already saw something in me that I hadn't seen in a long time. Are you always like this? I asked, trying to maintain control of the situation. Always getting what you want? He chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. I'm a lawyer, remember? Convincing people is my job. I rolled my eyes. So, it's a game for you? He paused for a moment, as if he were really considering the question. Then, with a calmness that unsettled me, he replied, No, but I think it is for you. My breath hitched. What? You're trying to figure out if you can trust me. Testing every word, every gesture, as if you're waiting for me to make a mistake. My stomach churned. He saw me, and that scared me. You think you're very clever, don't you? He shrugged. No, I'm just waiting for you to decide if you want to keep playing or if you're going to give me a real chance. My chest tightened, because I knew deep down he was right. And the worst part of me wanted to give that chance. I wanted to say something. a sharp response, a way to regain control of the situation. But for the first time, the words failed. Ethan didn't avert his gaze. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't trying to convince me of anything. He was just there, waiting for my response as if he knew that sooner or later I would give in. And maybe I would. I sighed, pushing my empty cup aside. All right, you want a real chance? Then show me who you are. He raised an eyebrow. I thought I was already doing that. No. I crossed my arms. So far, all I know is that you're a lawyer, that you like cappuccino, and that for some reason you decided to be my bodyguard last night. But I want to know more. Ethan seemed to consider my words. Then he pulled out his wallet and left some bills on the table. Come with me. My heart raced. Where to? He smiled. To really get to know me. Against all my defenses, I stood up and followed Ethan out of the cafe. The next few minutes were a blur of hurried steps through the streets of New York. At every corner, I tried to guess our destination, but Ethan kept the mystery, guiding me with a calm confidence. You're not going to kidnap me, are you? I teased, trying to ignore the cold knot in my stomach. He laughed. Are you always this suspicious? I'm a realist. Then let's change that. I was going to retort, but before I could say anything, Ethan stopped on the sidewalk and pointed to the building in front of us. A library. I frowned. Seriously? He laughed at my surprise. Were you expecting an expensive restaurant or a flight to Paris? Something less nerdy. Welcome to my nerdy side, then. I should have been bored, but for some reason that made me smile. And as we entered the library, I realized that maybe Ethan Carter was much more than I had imagined, and that I wanted to discover every part of him. The smell of old paper and weak coffee filled my senses as we entered the library. The place was spacious, with dark wooden shelves and tall windows that let the morning light in gently. There were few people there, all immersed in their own worlds of stories and knowledge. I stopped at the entrance, crossing my arms. So, lawyer, is this where you bring all the women you want to impress? Ethan smiled sideways, walking among the shelves as if he knew every inch of that place. No, just the special ones. My chest tightened. Funny, I thought your idea of a date involved something more conventional. He picked a book from the shelf, flipping through the pages without looking at me. Who said this is a date? I rolled my eyes. You're taking me to know a place that's important to you, asking me deep questions and trying to surprise me. What else could this be? Ethan finally lifted his gaze, and the intensity in his green eyes made me hold my breath. It could be a date, or it could just be two people trying to figure out if it's worth it. My legs went weak. He always did this, unraveling me with just a few words without even trying. Ethan kept walking, and I followed him out of pure reflex. He stopped in front of a table hidden among the shelves and lightly tapped the wooden top. I used to come here after college. I always sat at this table. I sat on the other side, curious. Why? Because it was the only place where the world fell silent. There was something melancholic in the way he said that, as if he were letting me see a piece of himself that few people knew. You seem like someone who doesn't like silence much. He smiled but didn't deny it. Maybe that's why I needed it. We sat in silence for a few seconds. For the first time since we met, I felt that Ethan wasn't trying to provoke or challenge me. He was just being himself. And I wanted to know more. What did you read here? He spun a book between his fingers, thoughtful. Law, at first. Then anything that made me forget about law. Like what? He pushed a book in my direction. I took it and looked at the cover. The Great Gatsby. My lips parted in surprise. You like this book? No. He smiled slightly. But I like the idea that someone can spend their whole life chasing a dream and still believe it was worth it. My throat went dry. Because suddenly I wanted to ask Ethan what his dream was. And more than that, I wanted to know if I could be a part of it. I ran my fingers over the aged cover of The Great Gatsby, absorbing Ethan's words. He looked at me as if he knew exactly the effect he was having, but for the first time, he didn't seem to be playing. Do you identify with Gatsby? I asked, my voice coming out softer than I expected. He shrugged, leaning back in his chair. Not exactly. But I understand what it's like to want something that feels out of reach. My heart leapt. I wanted to ask what that something was. Or who. But instead, I just said, I never liked this book much. He raised an eyebrow, surprised. Why? I held the book between my hands, organizing my thoughts. Because Gatsby spent his whole life chasing someone who was never really his. He lived for a love that only existed in his head. Ethan was silent for a moment, watching me with those green eyes that seemed to see beyond my words. And you? He asked after a while. Have you ever chased something like that? I swallowed hard. No. My answer came out too quickly. He smiled slightly. Are you sure? I took a deep breath. I chased a relationship that was already broken before I even realized it. I thought that if I tried hard enough, I could fix it. But some things can't be fixed. I stared at him. And you? Have you ever chased something impossible? He looked away for a second, gently tapping his fingers on the table. Already. And did you manage? He looked back at me, and the silence between us grew thick. Not yet. My chest tightened. Because by the way he looked at me, I had the terrible feeling that maybe that something was me. And I didn't know if I was ready for that. The silence between us weighed as heavily as the unspoken words. Ethan was still looking at me that way, like he was waiting for something. As if the answer to what he wanted was right there in front of me, and I was the only person capable of giving it. And that scared me, because if I were honest with myself, I felt the same. I shouldn't feel this way. Not after everything I had been through. Not after I had promised myself that I wouldn't let anyone mess up my life again. But Ethan Carter was there, sitting across from me, and I knew that somehow he had already done that. Do you always look at people like that? I asked, trying to ease the tension. He smiled, tilting his head. Like what? Like you're trying to figure out a secret. Maybe I am. And did you find anything? Ethan watched me for a long moment before answering. I think so. My breath caught in my throat. Before I could say anything, he took the copy of The Great Gatsby from my hand and set it back on the table. Then he stood up and reached out to me. Come. I looked at his hand, then at his face. Where to? He smiled patiently. You said you wanted to get to know me. So come. My first reaction was to hesitate. But then, in an impulse that made no sense, I reached out and placed my hand in his. The touch was firm, warm, safe. And in that moment, I was sure of one thing. I had already made my decision. Ethan's hand was firm but gentle in mine, as if he knew I could let go at any moment. But I didn't let go. Not when he guided me out of the library. Not when we walked side by side through the streets of New York, unhurried, without a definite destination. And not when. Suddenly, he stopped and turned to me. What are you waiting for? He asked, his green eyes shining in the soft afternoon light. My heart raced. Waiting for what? For you to tell me if you're going to keep running, or if you're going to give me a chance. My throat dried up. He always did this, unraveled me with just a few words. Because deep down, I knew he was right. I was running. From him. From myself. From whatever was growing between us since the moment I woke up and found him in my bed. And maybe it was time to stop. I took a deep breath and looked into his eyes. And what if I say I'm still scared? Ethan's smile was gentle this time. Then I wait. My chest tightened. Aren't you afraid? He raised an eyebrow as if the answer were obvious. Afraid of what? I swallowed hard. That I'm not worth it. Ethan let out a low laugh, shaking his head. Then, taking his time, he raised his hand and brushed a strand of hair from my face. The touch was light, but my whole body reacted. I don't think that's a question for me anymore, he said, his voice husky. I could have pulled away. I could have stepped back, but I didn't. Because in that moment, I realized that Ethan wasn't just a stranger who had appeared in my life at the wrong time. Maybe he was exactly who I needed to find. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready for that. I smiled slightly and intertwined my fingers with his. I think you just earned your chance. The smile he gave me made my heart stop for a second. And without saying anything more, he pulled me close. and that's how it all began.